Hey folks, we're going to Reddit for a question, but this one's actually a message on Reddit, which is pretty cool. So, someone had found my content searching online looking for some C sharp help, and I guess my stuff was at the top. Yes! And then they reached out for some help. So, I'm going to read this question out, of course, because they messaged and it'll be kept anonymous. And that's my reminder to you that if you would like some questions answered, leave them in the comments or just send a message to me on literally any social media platform you want. I usually go by Dev Leader on social media, and that's also my main YouTube channel. So let's dive into this one. It says, I saw your post and your content. It looks really promising. I was looking for some advice. I have a Bachelor of Science and Master of Science in Computer Science and am currently a software dev. I struggle with imposter syndrome mainly because of ChatGPT. I use it all the time. Parts of a program I'm developing that I'm confused about, I get info from it and type it out manually. I prompt it for more info if I don't understand something. What's your opinion on using it? Do you think it makes for creating bad developers? My dream is to one day work at Microsoft, and I want to start learning the way Microsoft expects their engineers to. So I think this is a great question. I think this is probably something that is on the minds of many developers, not necessarily the Microsoft specific part, but I think like just this idea of we have all of these AI tools that are booming right now. There's tons of advancements, and we have I don't know if it's quite a dichotomy, but we have a lot of people up and coming as software developers and coming into the industry and using AI tools extremely heavily. Some people will say to a fault. You have people very vocal about this stuff online. I think for a lot of us that have been in the industry for a while, the bias is very much like, well, that's not the way that you write software. Therefore, all of these devs are bad. I just think that this is kind of like the common thing that's being said by people in industry. And in my previous videos on topics like this, I've been trying to say like yeah, like that kind of is my view in terms of like how to approach software development and learning. It feels like there's almost like an abuse or misuse of AI tools. But I've been also saying that I'm trying my best to keep a very open mind about how this stuff could look, right? I can't remember where this was. I think on LinkedIn today I saw and I don't know if this is actually true, but someone was making a statement that they remember a point in time where they were in college or university or something, and their professors were telling them something along the lines of like, oh, IDEs, like your integrated development environment, like VS Code or Visual Studio or whatever you like to use. They were saying that their professors were like, oh, like that's ridiculous. Like, no, you should have to code just in an editor, and like that's all you need. And using these other tools is gonna like basically make you dumb. So that was not my experience. Maybe this is, I don't know, before my time, but they were saying they went through a period like this. And like, I couldn't imagine today programming without an IDE. Now, I've drawn some comparisons before to using AI, like, and I've said like, hey, it's just a tool, and people are like, well, it's more than just a tool that actually writes code, so it's going to steal all of our jobs. And I'm like, I don't know where you draw the line. I'm not saying, when I say it's like just a tool, I mean like it is not like walking around with a mind of its own trying to take your job, so to speak, right? It's more like it is a tool that we can leverage as humans, as developers. So I don't know. People get up in arms about this. I feel like when I make AI based videos, they not always, but they either get a lot of views, which is great for me on YouTube, but also like there's a lot of people that have negative reactions to them too, and it's because it's polarizing, right? People are usually on one side of these things. I try to acknowledge what my opinions are, but I'm trying to like also explain different viewpoints and how I'm trying to keep my mind open, right? So to this person's question, well, I want to address a couple things. Imposter syndrome, which I want to touch on. They're mentioning ChatGPT here. I'm just going to call that as LLMs in general and AI tools. My opinion on using it, and then like how Microsoft expects people to use it, at least the developers and stuff. So maybe let's start with the last part. Okay, so I I was recently on a panel and I made a video on Code Commute about this. Like one of the last videos I put out was about when I was doing this live speaking session at Microsoft for early in career folks. And there was a CVP from a different org, which is super cool. Like the CVP was on this panel with us. And I guess one of the areas that he has responsibility over is some of the AI tools. And he was saying there was a question that came from the group that was along the lines of like using AI tools and things like that. And so he was offering some perspective, and he was saying like, hey, like we don't, and I think this is fair to say, right? We don't expect that things are perfect, right? Like we've all seen LLMs say things that aren't accurate or do things like hallucinations and stuff. So he was saying like, we know that things aren't perfect, but like they can't get better unless we have feedback. So I've heard him say in this session to early in career folks, and I'll touch on some other examples, but he was basically saying like, hey, we want you all using it. We want your feedback. We want to know what works well. We want to know what's not working well. And he said, how did he had a really good way of saying it, and I'm not going to be able to repeat it without butchering it, but it was along the lines of like, he said, I think a lot of you don't realize how much agency you have. Agency? AI agents, good pun. Okay, but he was saying that you don't realize how much agency you have because he said, you have a bunch of people that are up here speaking to you that have, 10, 20, 30 years of experience. Like I think he had almost 30 years of experience at Microsoft, and he started as an intern, so super cool. But he's like, how many of us up here have 20 years of experience with Copilot? He's like, none of us, right? Like this stuff hasn't been around. And because you're there at the beginning, he's like, you don't realize how much agency you have because a lot of that stuff is like in these areas is almost like leveled the playing field for how we should be thinking about using them. So he's like, your feedback is tremendously valuable to be able to provide. So I thought that was really cool. And basically, he's not only encouraging people to be using these tools at work, but also to be providing feedback. And when his point about agency was really like, you might not realize how valuable your feedback is because you are basically helping shape the way that we will use these tools because of where you're coming in at, which I thought was a pretty fascinating statement. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing what he said. And I don't mean to misrepresent it. That was kind of my interpretation of his wording. So there's one example of someone saying like, hey, we expect you to use it. I know, like I can say my skip level manager will be in conversations where he'll tell me like he was asking Copilot about something and has encouraged us like as part of his his leadership team within our org. Like, hey, like I encourage you to use it more and gave us examples of like even things like approaching your planning for the week and catching up on stuff. He's like, try it. Like, here's some prompts that like I have been trying. I was doing something with one of the engineers on my team a week or two ago. Maybe it was just this past week, and he was asking me something. So I was trying to explain some concepts to him as he's exploring a bit of a different area within the team. And so I was trying to do my best to define things in a way where I'm like, I want to make sure that I'm not like glossing over some things and like, because he might not know those either. So I wrote out my explanation, sent it to him, and then I asked Copilot. And I said, hey, like, here's a concept, and like, could you try explaining it? And then I said, assume like basically the person is coming into this domain with very little knowledge. And it had a couple of extra things to add in for some different context. So like I was trying to use it just for even explaining things that I knew about, that I thought I knew how to explain, and just look for different ways to leverage it, right? So some more use cases. Now, in terms of using it for coding, like there's AI code suggestions in code reviews. There's obviously Copilot for Visual Studio. When we do reflections on like how people are trying to learn about AI, leverage AI, because through different feedback loops, we're trying to make sure that people feel supported and that we're learning about that, right? So what's a good example of this? Like, just even survey feedback on, like, do you feel like you're getting enough learning opportunity and that kind of stuff? And some of it's broken down into, like, how about, like, learning about AI or leveraging AI at work and getting feedback on that. So it's always one of the areas where if you're not working on something that is directly AI, like very explicitly, like I'm incorporating like AI like into this feature or something, then sometimes I think people are like, hey, I might be missing out. But that's not the only way that you get to work with AI, right? So we try to remind people, okay, like how many of you are using Copilot actively in Visual Studio? And then we kind of look at who's saying yes, and it's like, okay, so if you're saying you want more exposure with AI and you want to be leveraging AI more, like why not start with things like that? Right? So we do try to encourage people, like, use Copilot. So I think it's kind of interesting because as this person wrote in to ask, like, what is Microsoft expecting? I would say across the board there is this expectation that people are using AI tools more and more, and it's encouraged. But I think that like one of these like details that gets kind of glossed over, or like, I don't know, I feel like it comes up a lot, but also depending on who you're talking to and how you're talking about it, it can get left out too. I didn't mention it at any point in that part of the conversation, but I never said at any point, do this after you highlight everything from the output of the LLM, copy and paste it, right? I didn't say blindly go take it. I didn't say, like, don't check it. I never said that. So a lot of the time, like, I don't know. I feel like I don't have to say that to remind people, but I feel like maybe I do need to start saying it more, because if you're finding that you're so reliant on it, like, is it because you are not getting that feedback loop for learning? And if that's the case, I don't mean to suggest like stop using it. I mean, like, maybe you leverage it for asking it for more detail. So this person, I just want to kind of read again what they wrote. They said, I use it all the time. Parts of a program I'm developing that I'm confused about, I get info from it and type it out manually. So they're even saying like they type it out manually, but parts of a program I'm developing that I'm confused about. Okay, so let's think about this scenario. I don't have the details on this, and I'm not trying to say it is one way or the other, but let's assume that this individual built some of this program and they or someone else is just copying and pasting stuff out of an LLM. System's been built up. And now this person's like, okay, I got to navigate this code base. Again, this is hypothetical because I don't know the details. So they have to navigate it because they're confused about it. And they're asking the LLM, in this case ChatGPT, for information on it. Like, I think that can be helpful. Like, why not? I think that it's a tool that you can use for that. And they're saying that like they type out stuff manually that comes out of ChatGPT. I mean, how you do it, if you copy and paste or versus manually type it out, like, in my opinion, whatever. But at the end of the day, I think you need to understand what's going in, like, into the program that you're building. So, like, there are times that I absolutely will ask, like, especially for building SQL queries and stuff. I know how to build SQL queries, but I love using ChatGPT to go, like, I'll define my schemas and say what I'm trying to do and just say, write the query for me. But I go run it and I check it out and I review it and I'm like, okay, that makes sense. Right? So I do think that you can, and in my opinion, I would say you should be using it at this point, at least for the workflows that make sense for you. You might find that there's some situations where you're like, is this not really working for me? It's slowing me down. And I've said this before too. That doesn't mean, from my perspective, give up on it. It means maybe right now that's not an effective use, but, like, I wouldn't write it all off. So I'm trying to find ways where I can leverage it, but I would never basically just copy and paste something without trying to understand it. And it's been this way since using Stack Overflow. I don't know if some of you remember what Stack Overflow is, but if you're copying and pasting something, there's a reason we do that, right? Like someone has solved the problem before, or at least we think it's the same problem. That's why we're copying and pasting it, right? We found what looks like the answer to our problem, copy it, paste it. Why are you reinventing the wheel if someone solved the problem? It doesn't matter if an LLM spat it out, if you found it on Stack Overflow, if you found it on some forum. You're going to go take that code and you're going to go put it into your code base. But at no point did anyone across, like, over the years recommend, like, by the way, don't read that over and just hope it works. No one has ever said that. So if you're finding, like, and I mean this, like, genuinely, right? If you're finding, like, I just have to copy and paste it out and I literally can't understand what it's doing, but I got to keep going, I would say pause. Just pause what you're doing. And before you get too far, just go ask the LLM about what's happening. Just take the time to ask it to explain it to you. And then test your assumptions with it. Right? Like you literally have this thing that you can type back and forth with and ask it questions. So just to give, what's the last SQL query I asked Chat? I'm at my computer, so let me just pull it up. Okay, so I'm building a SaaS called Brand Ghost, which is for content creation, and the last thing that I was building or sort of like prototyping is a content repository, and I wanted to have revisions of content that I could keep in this SQL table. So my idea was that as you're changing, it's like key value pairs, as you're changing some of the fields, I will track revisions of those things. Then I said if you want to delete something, I'm not going to like, I don't know. My thought was like you're going to set a null value in the table as a new entry. And then when I want to read back the latest state, if I see null there, it's like that value doesn't exist. So I had this all figured out in my head. I had the schema. And I'm like, okay, do I know how to write the query? I'm like, I need to select. I need to make sure that I need to be able to group properly. I need to be able to filter out the nulls. I have to sort by the revision. Like, I know how this would come together. But you know what I did? I just asked ChatGPT. I said, here's some sample data. Here's what I want it to do. Write me the query. And then what I did next was I ran it across the data. And I said, great, that did exactly what I asked you to do. Except I didn't ask you to do everything properly. Because it gave me the revision of when the particular key value pair was changed last. And I said, for this particular query, I want the latest key value pair I want the latest revision across all of the key value pairs. So if there was up to 10 revisions, I don't care if that particular key value pair was last changed at revision 2. I need that column to say 10. That's what I want. But I didn't tell it that originally, so I still had to go check it. I still had to go work with it, check it out, make sure I understand it. If I didn't, like if it spat, I keep glancing over at my screen, but like if it spat out a part of a query and I was like, man, I don't even know what that does in SQL, I would start asking it. Because this is going to go into a product I'm building. And if I don't understand what's going on, you know what's going to happen when something's going wrong in the product? I'm going to be sitting there panicking going, I have no idea what the hell is going on and how to debug this. Now, there are going to be situations too where if I don't know what's going on, even if I had all the best intentions, I might be able to collect data and give it to ChatGPT and say, I can't see the pattern here. Like, can you call out some things that I should go look for? And I've been doing this with some different REST APIs that I've been integrating with, where I'm calling things and I'm like, I have this all done the right way. It's all to spec, and I'm still getting an error. And then ChatGPT will spit out some other ideas, and it's like, by the way, like you need to set this content type in the request header, and it says like, you based on this package you're using, it looks like you should be doing that, but maybe try setting it explicitly. So I try it out, and I'm like, hey, that solved my problem, right? Or there's other scenarios, but it's really good for giving me some suggestions to try out when I'm debugging things. So, like, this is the other part of this person's questions. Like, what are my thoughts on it? Like, I'm using it all the time. All the time. but I'm constantly checking what it's doing. So there's a big, I don't want to say big difference, maybe it's a big difference. How I'm using tools like this, because I have decades of experience developing software, there's a bunch of stuff I already know. If you're brand new to all of this and you don't have decades of experience, I'm not saying like, oh, I am better than you. I'm just saying I have a lot of this other experience that I know to go ask for certain things or to check for certain things because I have that experience. If you don't, that's fine, but you need to like build that part up to start questioning what's going on to understand things. That's all. Now, are you allowed to use an LLM for that? Why not? I wish I would have had an LLM when I was learning how to program. Like that would have helped so much. Right? Like I feel like we were can I say blessed? I don't know. I feel like having Stack Overflow was friggin' awesome, right? Because we could go search for things and be like, man, someone else figured this out. It felt like any problem you had, if you search for it, you're going to find something. You just had to know how to search for it. Now you don't. Now you just have to know how to ask about the problem and give enough detail. So, yeah, I basically what I'm saying is like I do support this stuff, but I do think that it requires that you're asking for information about what's going on if you don't understand it. And no one at Microsoft has specifically said this to me or the people that have been in the conversations that I've been part of, but like I think the expectation is that you should understand what you're committing to a code base. Like people are going to be reviewing that code. If they ask you a question about it and they're like, hey, that's not the pattern we use or that's not the style. If you're like, I don't know, man, Copilot said it, they're going to be like, dude, like, do you know what it's doing? And if you don't, it's like, it's just going to be a recipe for not a good time. Like just take the time to understand stuff. Just do that. Okay. Maybe let's talk about imposter syndrome to round things out. So this is a weird one because I like talking about imposter syndrome a lot because I think it's really important and I think that it affects everyone at some point, and in fact probably many times. And when it goes away, it comes back in different forms, especially for people that are successful. Right, because they're often finding themselves in new challenging situations and then that imposter syndrome spins back up. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with imposter syndrome or they get confused by this, because someone will say, well, what's the difference between actually being an imposter and imposter syndrome? Imposter syndrome is when you do legitimately have the skills and qualifications to do something, but you feel as if you don't. You start second guessing yourself, doubting yourself. But by all measures, you have the experience and the capabilities to do something. Being an actual imposter is when you legitimately do not. So, I'm trying to think of a good example off the top of my head. If I said, I'm going to go start building Rust apps professionally, I should be able to do that, and I'm an expert Rust developer, and like I'm going to start doing that. I would be an absolute imposter because I could barely write hello world in Rust. Right? I would be an imposter. It doesn't mean I wouldn't be able to do it, but to claim that I could, no, like I cannot go build Rust apps professionally. I would have to go start from a very junior sort of level on that. I might be able to do it, get through that sort of phase like quickly because of my other experiences, so that's great. But you know, if someone came to me and was like, I want to pay you money because you build software and I want you to build this in Rust, I would be like, man, I can't, because I would legitimately be an imposter in that situation. Now, I build stuff in C# all the time. If someone came to me and they said, I would like you to build an app for me in C# using ASP.NET Core, especially like in a domain that I'm familiar with, even if I wasn't familiar, it might make me nervous, right? And maybe, let's say I do it, right? So I'm going to be paid to go build something. I might start getting imposter syndrome along the way because there's pressure or because I'm experiencing something that I'm not comfortable with. But like I said, I've been building stuff in C Sharp for forever now. I don't even know how many years, since 2007. Long time. I built all sorts of stuff. So I should be able to do it. I should be able to, but I might have imposter syndrome about different parts of that. Doesn't mean that I'm not capable, but I might start second guessing myself. So just trying to give you some clarity on imposter syndrome or some different perspective on it. Now, for this person, they're saying, I'm experiencing imposter syndrome mainly because of ChatGPT. I assume what they mean by this is that they're like, I'm using this thing. I got people around me saying like, you know, they didn't say this, but I'm kind of making assumptions, right? Based on everything I see on the internet, like, oh, you're not a real developer if you're using ChatGPT. But like, I don't know. I don't know. I feel like a lot of this stuff is getting like kind of ridiculous at this point. I've had, I've made videos talking about one of my friends who has literally successfully secured a software contract, building software. He uses LLMs like crazy, and he's absolutely crushing it putting systems together. And if you were to ask him, if I were to text him or call him right now, he would tell you, oh, I'm not a programmer. No. And I would say in the beginning, he was absolutely, like when he first started, I would say, yeah, he's an imposter. He doesn't know what he's doing. But at this point, he's literally proven it. He's not an imposter anymore. He's literally building systems. So I find it really weird. I think that it's such like a foundational change in how people are approaching learning that it's making so many people uncomfortable, and they have a really difficult time going, this is a different way. And because it looks so different, I have to say that like it's wrong. And I think like as I keep making videos and talking about this stuff, I just want to keep reminding myself, like, I don't know if wrong is the word I would use. It's different. It might not be what I recommend either at this point. I don't know. But I want to keep challenging myself on that too. So for this person or anyone else, like if you're going through like getting into software development and you're using LLMs very heavily, I kind of just think that's the way things are going to be going from now on. And I say that because it's clearly, maybe I shouldn't say clearly. People are gravitating towards it because it's at least making it seem like things are easier for them. Like you're not going to keep using a tool if you obviously felt like it was hindering you. I'm going to try to defend my train of thought here. These videos are always a stream of consciousness, so sometimes I say things and I'm like, oh, Nick, you better buckle up and figure this one out. But I think I stand behind what I just said, right? You're not going to use a tool if you're like, man, this clearly just slows me down and feels awful. You're not going to use it. But if it seems to be making, I'm using keywords, seems to be making your life easier, you're going to keep using it. And I think that's what we're observing. People keep using these things because it seems to make their life easier. Then I think what a lot of us are trying to acknowledge is like, yeah, that's going to work until it doesn't. But there's this like sort of nebulous area of like, well, what does it mean work until it doesn't? When does it stop working? And all of us are like, well, that code base is going to be such a mess. There's no way you're going to understand that and be able to navigate. You don't even know what's going on. You just copied the code out of it. I don't know, like, what if you can just go ask the LLM to explain it back to you? And say, here's the behavior, here's what I expect, here's the code, make it good. Right? Like, does it do it for you? Does it end up working? I don't know. Like, and I know this triggers a lot of people, and I'm kind of being a little bit facetious and sarcastic in some of my examples, but like, I, I'm trying to keep an open mind that like things might be moving more that way. And yeah, it's really different than how I went through it. People are saying, well, then you can't critically think. I'm like, I don't know. Like, if you get really good at being able to diagnose what's going on or understand things and being able to articulate things to the LLM, like supply it the relevant information, like maybe people get really good at that kind of stuff. Like, I can confidently say that, like, I don't know if I have. No, I can't say confidently and then say I don't know. I can confidently say that I do not have the best prompts. I certainly don't supply ChatGPT with all of the relevant information, especially the first time. And I only pick up on it because sometimes I go down a path and I'm like, why is this thing like so wrong? Why is it stuck? Why isn't it progressing? And then I realize it's because I'm not giving it enough information. So like, I'm not doing that well, but I genuinely wonder if people that are kind of used to this stuff from the beginning just get so good at doing that that it's kind of just like how they operate, and they do it way better than I ever will. Right? Like, we're talking about completely different tools here. So, I don't know. Like, to this person, I feel like the imposter syndrome part, especially with what other people are going to be saying, is that's probably going to be it's probably going to be a big thing for a lot of people, especially at this point in time over the next 5-10 years. And I don't know. I don't want to say like you're screwed and you got to deal with it. I just think that that's going to be probably part of like your generation of developers, is they're all going to be going through this kind of period where the imposter syndrome around leveraging AI tools is going to be a little bit amplified. But I would say, kind of like anyone going through imposter syndrome, is going to be like, one of the things that helps tremendously is the more experience that you build up and the more examples you have to give to yourself of like, hey, this was a time when I, felt like an imposter, and I worked through something and like came out on top and I was successful. The more of these things you have over time, the more times where you have imposter syndrome, it doesn't like fix it, but you're like, okay, like, I hear you, imposter syndrome, but also like, I have done really good things. I have been successful before. So like, you kind of do this balancing act, right? It doesn't fix the imposter syndrome. In that panel talk too that I talked about at the beginning of this, I think it was the CVP that was sitting there with us, said something along the lines of like, because I put him on the spot and I like kind of like derailed the conversation a little bit, and I've said, hey, like, have you had imposter syndrome? Because I was like, I know how beneficial it is for people to hear about others having imposter syndrome, especially when they're in like a really high up position, because you're like, there's no way, like, this person is a CVP at an enormous company, there's no way they felt imposter syndrome. And he's like, oh yeah. And he's like, he said something along the lines of like, instead of trying to pretend like it's not there, right? Like, oh, I'm not going to acknowledge imposter syndrome, like it doesn't affect me. He's like, no, you acknowledge it's there, but like, hey, imposter syndrome, I see you over there. Like, I acknowledge that you're there. Okay. And he's like, you almost like kind of like befriend it. Like, you acknowledge its existence. You acknowledge why it happens. And then you can also try to lean into these experiences that you've had in the past that have proven successful. So all of that to say that, I think that the imposter syndrome is going to be very common for a lot of people in general, but especially around the LLM usage for this generation of developers. But keep building stuff. This is what we've all been doing. We just keep building things. Right? It's that's how we all get practice. You might be able to build more things faster. I would highly recommend that you understand those things, because it's especially when we're talking about getting jobs and stuff like that, going for interviews and all that kind of stuff, it's not going to be very helpful to be able to say, like, I built 50 different apps, because you used AI and you don't understand how any of them work. Right? Like that's probably gonna kind of screw you over for your job search. Not that I'm saying you can't use AI to do it, but like if you're just trying to pump them out so that you can say that you have them, I don't think that's going to be helpful. But if you can say, like, I used AI to build this, and like, again, here's the stuff I learned, here's how I ended up redesigning it, or like, I went down this path using AI and asked it to go refactor and rewrite stuff because I wanted, some other behavior. I wanted to extend it. I wanted to optimize performance. Like, I think that these are all good, interesting things that are the types of things in side projects I would be doing anyway. So, yeah, I guess in summary, I would say, because this person asked, Microsoft is expecting that developers are using it. They want the feedback. They're encouraging it. I would say my biggest recommendation is just like, make sure you're understanding what it's saying. And you can use the AI that you're talking to ask it to explain things. So do that, right? Try not to just feel like you're rushing through to like speed farm coding, because that's probably not going to work out too well. So instead of speed farming your coding, like, ask it, learn, right? You have such an amazing tool in front of you to go learn and have it explain things in different ways. Leverage it. And then for imposter syndrome, I would say, not specifically because of the AI and ChatGPT stuff, I'd just say, like, get ready to experience imposter syndrome many times in your career. And like that person that I was saying in the panel recommended to people, like, don't try to pretend like it's not there. Try to understand it, understand why it's happening, because it'll be with you for a lot of your career. So I hope that helps. Thanks so much for watching. And if folks have questions they want answered, leave them in the comments or message DevLeader on social media. Thanks so much. I'll see you next time. Take care.